This manhwa has the most scientific magic system I've ever seen. I've analyzed a lot of different power systems on this channel, and most of them are based on a very simple idea: a mysterious magical energy. And don't get me wrong, this can be really interesting, but the truth is, they're basically asking you to believe in something that doesn't actually exist. But what if someone created a magic system based on real science? That is exactly what Infinite Mage tries to do. So today, I'm going to show you why this manhwa magic system is awesome, and I'll also compare it to some of the best power systems out there. This is the story of Chiron. He learns how to use the Spirit Zone, an extremely rare power, but more on that in a second. When he was just a baby, a hunter found him in the woods and raised him as his own son. One day, he accidentally meets Alpheus Miri, principal of the prestigious Magic Academy. And now, all he wants is to learn magic. And yes, this is a real magic wand. Years later, he's hired to organize the massive book collection of the noble Ojin family. And thanks to their support, he finally enters the academy. But here's the problem. When he gets there, he's already 17. Most of his classmates have already been training for years while he doesn't know a single spell. And that's exactly when we get to the magic system. The first thing you need to know about is the Spirit Zone. It's this big blue bubble expanding out of every single mage's body. Basically, it's an ability where you can sense everything around you. The first example we get is this kid who can guess how many coins someone is holding even though their hand is closed. Another example is when Chiron activates it. He can see every single detail of a tree. I know this sounds super lame, but it actually allows him to find the most fragile spot on the tree and chop it in a single swing, so pretty cool. But now that the basic stuff is out of the way, let me show you some freaking scientific magic. Infinite Mage has a ton of different spells like fireballs, tornadoes, whatever this is. But the one I want to talk about is teleportation. This is an ability you literally see in so many series. And most of the time is just some cool power where the character disappears and reappears somewhere else with some visual effects, but we almost never get a real explanation for it. In Infinite Mage, the first thing you need to use a spell is to understand the spell. For teleportation, Chiron has to understand the actual science of teleportation, like the physics. Because if he doesn't, it could fail and he'd run into a wall at very, very high speed. And once he understands all the science, he can move to step 2, using the Spirit Zone to start the spell. And when Chiron manages to do all of this, we get panels like these. I'm not gonna lie, most of the characters look like the same person with a different haircut. I think that the design of the uniforms might have been inspired by another Magic series, but you know what? I just can't put my finger on it. But despite all that, you can tell that the author really puts a lot of effort when it comes to the magic parts because they look visually delicious. Each spell looks completely different, and you can even see some of the science in the effects and particles they decide to use. Like teleportation, for example, where it looks like the person is turning into these light particles. The pages get absolutely crazy during magical sequences and usually take way more space. And during some of the spells, the artist isn't scared to use multiple panels to show us just how freaking powerful they are. Everything is so easy to understand while still looking freaking awesome. The art style of Infinite Mage perfectly complements its scientific magic system because these panels just stand out so much from everything else. Another thing that's super important is how the characters become stronger. When teachers evaluate students in the academy, they basically use magical measuring equipment and give you numbers depending on how strong your Spirit Zone is. A beginner might have a 3-meter zone, while a teacher might have one that stretches for over 30 meters, for example. And there's even an aspect of density. The more you're focused on what you're doing, the higher the density of your zone. The cool thing with this magic system is that you know how powerful the characters are because they give you literal numbers. The size and density of your Spirit Zone are measured in actual meters and percentages. These aren't just random numbers thrown in to sound cool, they determine what you can and can't do. I mean, your zone size is literally how far you can cast a spell, and its density is how much control you have over the spell once you threw it. Here's what actually happens. The moment Chiron steps into the academy, his Spirit Zone is so freaking big that it literally breaks the measuring equipment because it easily goes over 30 meters and has a density of 86.7%. But here's the question. Why is he so powerful even though he's a complete beginner? Here's the thing. As we saw with teleportation, in this magic system, the more things you know, the better. So like, do you know enough about fire to actually throw a fireball? And trust me, my man is very good at knowing things. While he worked for the noble family, Chiron read 850 history books in 2 years. Unlike a lot of main characters who are born with powers or get them from, mysterious old men, Chiron has to get them through the most brutal method you can imagine. Years of cutting trees and studying. No! I swear, I am so tired of the typical, you're special because of your bloodline characters we usually get. And I'm really happy Infinite Mage is going in a different direction, even though I'm pretty worried we're gonna find out that Chiron is just like the chosen one later in the story. But does this mean that any character can read a ton of books and, suddenly become overpowered? Well, yes and no. The reason it's important to have a big spirit zone is that mages can only use spells inside of their spirit zone, which is where the shapes come in. You need good defense, you can make your zone way smaller and transform it into a deltahedron. This thing. It's basically a shape that can withstand extremely powerful magic. You need more range, you can turn your zone into a giant plus sign. This lets you reach way beyond your normal range, but creates these dangerous spots where enemies can attack you super easily. Which is why some insane people try to rotate it really fast to cover more area while maintaining that long range. Need to fight multiple opponents? Switch to attack form, which looks like a star with points extending in all directions. Need to flex? Use a highly advanced form where you project your spirit zone away from yourself. This zone is not even attached to your body like the other forms, which means that you basically have infinite range. Problem is that it's extremely difficult to control and there's nothing to protect you at this point. Depending on what you need, you can turn your spirit zone into one of these 4 different shapes. Each form has clear strengths and weaknesses that creates this really incredible strategy game. Choosing the right form for the right situation becomes as important as how powerful you are as a mage. Which is really cool because in a lot of power systems, it's purely about becoming super powerful and there's not a lot of strategy to it. The best example of that I found is a scene where students have to hit a bunch of targets and score the maximum amount of points. The way Chiron does it is by shooting a ton of light beams. Turns his spirit zone into a regular sphere so that it maximizes his overall range. But then there's this other guy competing against him and he does the complete opposite. He projects his spirit zone out of his body, shrinks it down into a tiny ball, and fires single shots that hit with perfect accuracy. And he's constantly running mathematical equations in his head to predict target movement patterns. What makes this really cool is that neither of these approaches is technically better. They each have different advantages and disadvantages that reflect the user's personalities. It's not really about who has the most power, it's more about whose approach is better for this specific situation. Every mage has their own strengths, and someone who might be good at using one form might be complete garbage with another one. But trust me, there are so many other strategies they can use. One thing they need to remember is that the further they stretch their zone, the harder it is to control. This creates this kind of game where you need to choose if you're going to expand your zone for more range but sacrifice power, or keep it small for maximum impact but limited range. The spirit zone is literally the mental state of a mage, which means that if you're distracted or just not focused, your zone becomes way weaker. But if you're locked in and concentrated, it becomes stronger. There are also really rare abilities like the Red Eyes, which allows someone to fully remember specific moments they were in. There's Schema, which is basically a completely separate power system for sword wielders, but can also be used to fight or even play the piano. There's anti-magic that people can use to cancel the spirit zone. There are objects like literal magic bombs, and so much more. All of this means that characters can use their powers super creatively. But I'm not gonna lie, the smart characters are usually kind of overpowered. Although I will say that sometimes their intelligence is also based on stuff that actually exists, like this one guy that has Savant Syndrome, which is a real and very rare condition where someone has an extreme talent for a specific area, like music or maths, for example. So now, what happens when you compare this to regular power systems? Take Naruto's chakra. Sure, it's got rules about hand signs and elements, but the truth is it's still magical energy that exists in your body because the story kind of says so. And I know you've been Naruto running, but chakra is not a real thing. I am so sorry. Most power systems are basically just magic or some mysterious energy that lets you do cool stuff if you train hard enough. But what makes Infinite Mage so great is that there's still a magic energy source, but it's based on things that actually truly exist. It's about understanding science so freaking well that you can manipulate it with your mind. The more you know about physics, chemistry, biology, the more powerful your spells become. And listen, I genuinely have no idea if it's accurate, but the author is clearly trying something, so I appreciate that. There are genuinely so many moments with a ton of text explaining scientific ideas I had absolutely never heard about before. And that kind of made me lose my freaking mind. Okay, but seriously though, I've read stuff like Jujutsu Kaisen where I genuinely made an effort to, research and to find out about this whole complicated system. But I've never read a manga that made me excited about real science. I'm not joking. At some point, I was genuinely thinking about looking into every single scientific concept in this thing, but they were talking about so much different things that I ended up spending more time on that than, actually reading the manga. Closest comparison I can think of is Fullmetal Alchemist's Alchemy, because there are actually a lot of scientific ideas in that particular power system, but even there you get these mystical transmutation circles and the whole clapping hands thing that doesn't really have any basis in science. Another way a magic system can stand out is by tying it with world building. The Alpheus Magic Academy is like an actual school. Lower classes spend more of their time learning how to maintain a stable spirit zone. They're basically doing the fundamentals. In middle classes, they're focusing on actual spells. And the higher classes are all about preparing for professional mage life. All these students aren't just learning magic, they're diving deep into stuff like mathematics, chemistry, physics, and specialized magical skills that build on these scientific subjects. And the coolest part is there are a bunch of different specializations that you can focus on based on your natural skills. This one girl was literally a magic sniper. There are different magical buildings with their own unique story. There are different exams, like this one exam where you have to escape a labyrinth that's actively trying to crush you. Or even legendary magic objects like an armor that cancels magic. This feels like a sort of magical education with a lot of things to remember. But trust me, it does not make it boring. The fact that there is so much to learn from this world makes the magic system so much more fun. But in general, the world building is pretty awesome. Infinite Mage has like an extremely strict class divide between nobles and commoners. Magic is traditionally reserved for nobles, with commoners basically banned from learning it. This creates a society where knowledge is power in the most literal sense. By gatekeeping magical educations, nobles dominate. But when Chiron enters the academy as a commoner, that becomes his greatest strength. While nobles follow traditional methods without question, Chiron approaches magic with fresh eyes. He questions everything and finds smarter ways of doing things. Infinite Mage's magic system isn't necessarily better than a lot of other power systems, but it definitely does things very differently. And I genuinely think that a lot of manga and manhwa could learn from it. The thing I love the most about all this is how many authors are trying out some, new, interesting stuff. But the crazy part is that I recently found one of the best power systems in years, and for some reason, not a lot of people know about it. So check it out.